Welcome to DesignCast. Jason Reagan will guide you through the MYP design course like a pro. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to DesignCast. This is episode number 4, and I'm happy to be podcasting again after another really long break. I'm sorry, it's just been super busy, and I hope that everyone has had a really good start to the year or finishing up a year if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. Today we'll be talking about a lot of things, but we'll primarily focus on Criterion C for the design cycle. In the next episode, I'll cover the last criterion in the design cycle and hope that this helps people listen to the parts they need and then use those to move forward and listen to those episodes as they're interested and how they need clarification. So today I'm super excited to have Kim Hogg, a special guest with us in the studio. Kim is a lifelong tinkerer and is currently teaching MYP Language and Literature at Chadwick International in Incheon, South Korea. But most recently, before that, she was the MYP design teacher at Somersfield Academy in Bermuda. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Jason.
So, Kim, tell me a little bit about what you're currently doing with students and how that overlaps with design, the MYP design.
Well, you know, I think it's one of the things that's really great about design is that it does have so much opportunity for integration across the curriculum. Mm-hmm. When we think about those interdisciplinary units that the MYP requires, right. I think there's a lot of opportunity for design to get in there regardless. So right now with our grade 10 English class, which is our MYP 5 level, we are just finishing up a media studies unit. And in that we did a lot of exploration of different types of media. One of those being digital newspapers and another one being podcasting. So for the students' summative assignments, one of the opportunities or the options that they had was to produce something in one of those strains of media. And we had probably about 35% of the kids decided to do podcasting of some sort. And they turned out really, really well. I was so pleased with it. So that digital design opportunity, dealing with media in a way that is authentic, that is connected with communities that they're involved with, being produced for the school community at large. Giving them those parameters really allowed them to get into it and produce some work that in some cases was really like near professional quality. Like it was really amazing.
Yeah, I've enjoyed listening to the students as they've been working on those and coming and talking with me a little bit about some of those things too. It's been really, really exciting to see them get excited about doing this sort of thing and podcasting. And I know not everybody's going to be interested, but you're never going to please 100% of the people 100% of the time, right?
You're not, but that's where the importance of a little bit of student voice and choice comes into these kinds of assignments. Absolutely.
Well, that sounds awesome. I love that you're using opportunities in your language and lit class to infuse design criteria, strands, or design principles, which is really awesome. And so I want to ask you a few questions about Criterion C. And I'm thinking back to when you were in Bermuda working with MYP design students there. Let me first just remind our listeners a bit about the design criteria. Basically, students are to plan and create a chosen solution and follow the plan to create a prototype sufficient for testing and evaluation. In order to reach these aims of design, students should be able to construct a logical plan which describes the efficient use of time and resources, sufficient for peers to be able to follow and create the solution. They also need to demonstrate excellent technical skills when making the solution, follow the plan to create the solution, which functions as intended, and then fully justify changes made to the design and plan when making the solution. I do want to mention that in the old guide, the most recent guide updated, there was a 5th strand here about creating, presenting the final product as a whole. That's been folded into Criterion C across those strands. So that's not needed anymore. So if you're still using that one, please make sure that you switch to a different, to the most current guide. So Kim, tell me a little bit about how you go about meeting those strands with your students and the projects that they do.
Well, across the board, the planning and execution part is pretty critical. when it comes to, and this is a really, the nice thing about C is it is kind of a step-by-step process. So getting them to understand, where do I want to be? And that kind of backward planning that we talk about in education, getting them to recognize that from a project management perspective, that they've got the same kind of challenges that we face.
Right.
And so having them understand, like, this is the final product, this is how much it's time, like, to get through the last stage, I'm going to need this much time, and plan it backwards to when do I actually need to start making this thing. Right. Without a whole lot of experience, I think the kids find that really difficult because they don't have a good sense of how long things actually take.
Right.
I saw that in my podcasting unit with the kids.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I try to scaffold out some of those deadlines or some of that planning with intermediary deadlines, especially with the younger kids, MYP 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, definitely.
By the end of 3, they should really start to have both familiarity with the skills that are required and a sensitivity to some of the time. But one of the other benefits is they should also be becoming more fluent with the tools that they're using.
Right.
And so they should also be able to do more or do it to a higher standard within the same time block.
Right, absolutely. No, that sounds great. I like the idea that analogy almost, or that illustration of working backwards, because that's what we have to do every day in adult life,
right?
With everything that we do. So it's good that the students are getting exposure to that now. And I think that with any of the projects that we do, whether it's a podcast or it's 3D printing or it's whatever, that whole idea of time is something students struggle with.
Yes.
They struggle with time management anyway. So then to try to develop a logical plan, I've found probably the hardest part. If they can put the recipe together, they just can't predict what the temperature should be and how long it will take to do the different things.
Exactly.
And so definitely in watching the students with the podcasting unit, for example, and how many of them thought they were finished and then we're back here for another 2 hours working on things. And so I do think that's something that we have to continue to develop in students. And I think that yeah, that's one way to do it, you know, and it doesn't have to be a podcasting unit. It could literally be, cardboard boats, or it could be a whole number of things. But I think the number one complaint people have, I say complaint, concern that teachers have to do with that time management element that the students have. And I worry about some adults with time management. So definitely students, I understand it's a skill they're going to have to continue to develop. So as the teacher, we have to build that time in. Like you said, you have intermittent deadlines.
Right.
Maybe it's formative assessment to opportunities, whatever it's called. You want to set up those stages throughout the project. So I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Kim, for sharing that. I have a couple of questions that have come up in workshops that I've led, as well as in communication through Twitter or through the Google Plus group or things like that. And I want to ask you what you think on these.
Sure.
So how do you look for technical skills? How do you see if a student's demonstrated technical skills?
Well, I think it's a variety of ways, and it's really going to depend on what particular type of design you're doing. If you're doing food design, it's going to require a different set of technical skills than if you're doing some kind of graphic design or if you're doing product design. So I think that's one of those things that some lesson time needs to be given to as far as the development of those skills is concerned. We would probably talk about a lot of that maybe back in Criterion A to some extent, figuring out what they are and working on the development of them. But it's kind of like, what does it look like at a professional level? And then what's reasonable for a student at this stage in their development, both physically and mentally? And so I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that depending on like the level of fine motor control and things like that that are involved with certain aspects. These kids are growing.
Yeah, there's an age appropriateness there too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think as far as measuring it goes, having some good exemplars of what it looks like or what your expectations are can help you to both understand what your expectations are, but also show the kids what your expectations are.
Sure.
And then work around, like, what does the finished product look like? The finished product is really going to be, when it comes down to it, the demonstration of technical skills. Because if you're doing woodworking and your joints aren't tight, well, that's going to be evidence of your measuring's not
Right.
correct or your sanding's not correct or whatever
Sure.
it is, right?
Right.
So, I think understanding what finish is, like that fine finish is on something, is going to be your 7-8 band of technical skills.
Sure.
So, I think just looking at like what is expected as a professional or a craftsperson, and then working your way
Right.
backward from there to figure out what's possible and what's reasonable within the scope of the course, I guess.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you saying is like a really clear articulation of what those skills should look like a vertical articulation.
Precisely. Yes.
And we could even draw that back to the approaches to learning skills.
Completely.
Some of those, because they really should be teased out of the actual subject criteria. And I agree. I mean, I think that's where it's really important to have people in design, especially who have real world experience,
Yes.
who are teaching it, because then they know what it takes to be a web designer or to be a podcaster or to be a woodworker. And then they can work that backwards and say, okay, I had to learn by being able to plane a piece of wood. So students should be able to adjust the height of the plane so they can, get a proper smooth surface, that kind of thing. So definitely I think articulating that out is super important. So I agree with exactly what you've said. And so great answer. I appreciate that.
Ooh, pat in the back.
So how do you judge if peers can follow a plan? So, what kinds of things do you look for, so that do you just give it to a peer and see if they could figure it out, or what would you do?
There's definitely an opportunity for peer feedback on this. I think that's a really great formative stage.
Sure.
To give it to a friend or classmate and say, hey, could you do this?
Yeah.
I think we got to be careful about leaving things unsaid sometimes. And this is a thing that teachers can have to be careful about as well in our own instruction, right? Like assuming that the kid knows something that is something that comes out of experience
Right.
for yourself, right?
Right.
So who are those being directed towards? Understanding that a peer is going to have this amount of background knowledge, we can assume these things.
Right.
So what are the technical skills that are expected at this stage? And I think that's going to reflect what the planning
Right.
level of detail is. For me, I usually will sit down and look at it when I'm evaluating it, and do I understand the plan?
Right.
Can I
Yeah.
follow my way through the process?
I think that's the number one litmus test, there.
Right.
if you can follow it, absolutely.
So I think there's some degree of detail that's required, but being sensitive to both background knowledge and expectations for this is like an advanced level project.
Right.
You shouldn't have to explain A, B, and C to you in this level of project, but maybe
Yeah.
for a more beginner level, like a MYP2 kind of level, there may need to be a more explicit direction on very low level skills because that's where the students are at this point in time.
Right. Yeah. I think one important thing is to remember the age appropriateness again. So if it's a year one student in MYP, first off, hopefully your unit is not very complex to start with.
Right.
I've been known to give them their plans to other students. I've flipped the script sometimes on some lists, say grade 9 or grade 10 students, and I've said, okay, you've put your plan together, now switch with your neighbor, they're going to make your product. And there's a panic that ensues. There's this either really weird, eerie silence, or there's a complete chaos because it says, have you really done this plan correctly? And so I think if you can do that in a safe environment where failure is okay, and the students understand that if I can't do it, in fact, they're much harder on their peers probably than I would be. And so I find that's a fun one. So if you have time and you want to do that, and just for a day or two, let them see, can you make the product? Because I enforce to them that very often designers are not the fabricators of things. And so they need to be clear with their communication skills.
Yeah, totally. And I think having, again, exemplars of what things look like if it's product design, pull out some real product design and manufacturing instructions, right?
Some guides. Absolutely.
Or even like with a really young set of kids, pull out some Lego designs, pull out something from IKEA, pull out whatever you can find, and they don't even necessarily have to have language on them.
That
Right?
all the time I use those as examples. Absolutely.
And so having something that can be the visual aspect of it, along with like directional aspect of things, can really help students understand that it doesn't have to be just verbal.
Right.
And that a lot of times like those exploded diagrams and things like that can come in handy. And I think having that experience of putting things together or working with something that's familiar like a Lego set can help them understand like, oh, right, this is what an instruction looks like.
And it's funny that you mentioned both Lego and IKEA, because on their website you can get PDFs of all their instructions.
Yes, you can. Yep.
And so as a new teacher, that's a really good resource. Just to get – the other thing is to just put out a little all call to all the teachers in the school, asking them, any of you got an IKEA bookshelf instruction kit that you would like to give me? So it doesn't cost much to run these kinds of programs, because you can just be resourceful and just recycle and reuse things. And so I think it's funny that you mentioned that, because those are the two that I use a lot. So moving on, one of the things that is mentioned in the descriptors for Criterion C is showing or demonstrating or presenting changes that you've made from the final plan you had to when you've actually made the product. What kinds of evidence would your students show that? Would it be in a video form? How would you do that?
It's one of those things that would be project dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. But what sorts of things would you expect to see from your students?
Well, they might use photographs.
Okay.
And take pictures of what was actually created and juxtapose it with the plan to show, like, this was the plan.
Sure.
This is the final product.
Yeah.
I would expect them to annotate these.
Absolutely.
To demonstrate, like, this was the change. And again, that descriptor of why it was changed for this particular purpose. Whether that's just lack of materials or scheduling or whatever it was, because there's, life happens.
Right.
Video could be a part potentially. But I think a lot of times, because, well, it really depends on what you're making. But if it's a product or if it's something physical or visual, then obviously some kind of visual comparison with descriptions and annotations would be it. If it were audio or something like that, I haven't considered that in depth because I haven't done an audio project.
Right.
But it even could be like in video, it might be storyboards comparing, like, these scenes were deleted, we just decided they didn't work, or we moved them to a different place in the storyline because it fit better. Like, the justifications don't have to be really extreme. There's a lot of really good, reasonable reasons that are pretty easy to explain.
Yeah, well, maybe in the design, what you had wasn't going to work.
No.
And then after beginning to do it, you realize, oh, that joint on that corner of that drawer was never going to work, so I've had to change it to whatever.
Right.
I've recently been using a lot of video feedback with my students, so like a flip grid or something of that nature where they could actually describe what they changed. And they said, originally I thought it would be blue, but then I realized, oh, that's not sensitive to such and such, or it doesn't go with this. And then you can set the time on that for how long the videos can be and things like that, and then other students can comment as well, so that's one option. But I think that's right. It all is very heavily dependent upon the kind of project that you're doing. And you're right. A lot of the changes are just things like, well, I didn't have those materials. I wasn't able to get this. And so I think that's important to remember too. So good answer, man. You're killing it, Kim. Oh. Keep it up. Keep it up. So what do you do if the product just doesn't function properly or doesn't work at all? How would the students still be able to reach the highest bands of the criterion?
Well, to some extent, I want to know why it doesn't function properly. It could be like if you didn't plan out your time well enough or use your time well enough, your ATLs aren't developed in that area, then and if that's the reason the product failed, you're probably not going to get to those 7-8 band descriptors. I think you're pushing us to get a 6 on that one at all.
Sure, yeah.
If it is a justifiable failure for whatever reason, and that's there is some discretion, I think, required in that, then potentially I think 5-6 is attainable. But I think understanding both the product that you're trying to create, the process by which you're going to do it, and getting that planning in. I'm loving this alliteration, right? Getting that planning in to ensure that you can get to the outcomes that you want to get to is pretty critical. So if the product fails, then I think in some level that's something that has to be, well, I don't know. If you have the time, depending on the length of your project, then you can go back through that iteration phase, right? And you can make some more changes to your design, go back to B, revisit it, explain the changes in D that you've learned from this first failed outcome, and reiterate.
Right.
But if you don't have the time and you do have a project that fails, I think, again, depending on was it well planned out? Did you demonstrate a good understanding of the technical skills required to get there? What was the reason that it failed? Yeah. Then that would play somewhat into the decisions about where that's scored, I think.
I think, too, it might actually make Criterion E easier if the product does fail.
Criterion D easier?
Criterion D.
Yeah, true.
Did I say E? It's Criterion D. Easier
the old
because
one.
It's the old one. I had a brain block there for a minute, but so I mean, in many instances, the products the students make don't work. I mean,
it's true.
And you learn a lot more from failure than you do from things working.
Yeah.
And there's different degrees of failure. I mean, a podcast. It only fails if some of the technical things don't work.
Right.
In that instance, you have some degree of success either way.
Right.
But if you confuse sugar for salt when you're making a cake, that's a major failure because you're going to eat it and go, no, this doesn't work at all. It's inedible. So I really do think it depends completely on the product itself.
Yeah.
However, that documentation, if you have the evidence of you making it, of doing all this, you just made one mistake.
Yeah.
I hesitate to say that sinks the whole project.
No, I don't think it sinks the whole project.
And so I think that we definitely have to take all those factors into consideration. And where I think this is where the controversy, so to speak, comes in because, as a design teacher, ultimately making stuff is what we want to do. And so it says to me, wait a minute then, how am I justifying that students are not making things properly but still doing well on a project? And so I think that's where I'm just playing the other side here. That's where a lot of the frustration comes in, especially if a teacher has come from a very different system than the IB system, where skills are focused on. If you're coming out of the UK-based system or out of the US or one of the Australian national curriculum, there are skills that are assessed, and the product, ultimately is what makes or breaks the grade in a sense. And so I think this is where the discussion comes in.
I think that's something that it's worth drawing attention then to strand 3 of this criteria just for that very reason. Because if we look at the 3-4 band, it says they create the solution which partially functions and is adequately presented. Or at the 1-2 band, it functions poorly, presented in an incomplete form. So to fail the project, it needs to not only not function, but you didn't even finish the project. Right. So in the 3-4 band, you finished it. It might sort of kind of work, and you've presented it well. And so even if it fails, it still passes. Sure. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No. I know exactly what I'm with you.
And so, and I think the rationale behind that actually is really important and worth talking about because one of the whole purposes is to help these kids develop their grit. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
To be able to accept that failure is part of the process. And creating that resiliency in them to be able to take a failure and say, you know what, it's not the end of the world.
That's what I've learned from it. Exactly.
Right? Exactly. What did I learn? And that is the whole Criterion D
that's
that you'll
all
get to
D
next
is
time.
all about.
But,
Exactly.
But I think that's so critical and worth not ignoring and paying special attention to because honestly, what's the whole point of design if it's not to teach kids that
Absolutely.
iteration is the process by which everything gets better.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm just telling you what the normal argument is there. So
Yeah.
Well, Kim, I really appreciate you being here. What sort of future projects do you think you're going to be doing with students moving forward? Have you got any ideas, or you willing to share?
That's a great idea. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, because I'm so focused on Lang and Lit right now, I'm having a hard time thinking about design.
That's okay.
But there's so much opportunity.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
It's like some of the units we did last time that I really enjoyed doing with like my 8th graders, my MYP3 class. We did logo design for the upcoming 2026 Olympics that don't have they have candidate cities but no cities selected, so they got to have some choice on which cities they worked with.
Okay. Yeah.
Did some examinations of that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of different things out there that are great, whether it's product or digital, food, fashion.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's something that I do love about design is the breadth of it.
Yeah.
And how it can be incorporated into so many different areas. So, sorry, no unit outlines
ideas
for
yet.
you guys, but have enjoyed doing a lot of different stuff, and hopefully I'll be learning from you guys.
Absolutely. What I would love is if people could listen to this and then send me a quick audio clip of some of the things they're thinking about doing. I'd be happy to put them into the next episode, or just to share what people are thinking of doing. So, thanks again, Kim. I appreciate you coming.
It's my pleasure.
Just a few things. I really want to hear about what you and your students are doing right now, because I know that you're doing amazing stuff. So following people on Twitter, as well as the Google Plus group, which brings up what we're going to do with the Google Plus group, but that's another podcast altogether. But if you have any ideas on what we should do, I know Slack has come up, Twitter's come up, using the actual IB discussion forums, things like that have come up. And so we'll see what those alternatives are as things go on. So I really do want to hear from you. There are a number of ways to get in touch with me. You can use the Google Plus community as long as it's still open. You can email me at mr.reagan, REAGIN, @gmail.com, or call me on my Google Voice number, which I promise I will not answer. It goes directly to voicemail, and that's +1 678 870 6676. And I can use your clips from your voicemail to add to the podcast. And then I have a Voxer ID as well. All these things are on my website, which is gg.gg/Jason Reagan, JASONREAGIN. And lots of ways to get in touch with me. Of course, you can follow me at Twitter at DISKON, the number 4NO, Disco Inferno. Okay, so I look forward to hearing from you. Do send me your questions about Criterion D. I promise we'll do it sooner next time. I'm hoping a new episode will be out quite soon. As always, I want to thank the lovely Mariana McMahon for the excellent intro. It never truly gets old. So thank you guys so much. I look forward to hearing from you.